We talk about denial of service protection, really focusing in on DDoS itself, distributed denial of service. In other words, they're hitting our systems with so much information or so many requests that we can't reply. We get too busy to reply to everyone, and so we start dropping things. Their goal is to make sure we drop everything, right? So they're using these kind of outward bound attacks, outside in attacks that are really focusing in on us not being able to respond, take our capabilities to its knees so that we cannot protect. And so what we have to do is make sure that we're looking for these attacks, understanding where they're coming from, and then being aware so that we can share that information upstream to the ISP, et cetera. And this is also where it's a good idea to have multiple ISPs so we can switch it over to another one should we get this kind of an attack. So what they're saying here is we've got to monitor for these things. We have to make sure that the subnets we're using aren't more likely to be attacked because they're part of the library or some other public entity that generally gets attacked all the time. If we share the same pipe as they have, well, our pipe is also likely to be affected when theirs is. So what they're saying is we'd much prefer using a subnet that has a unique capability that isn't shared with the same resources as the public ones. Makes sense, right? And when we talk about separate from internal networks, what they're saying is they really want to define and take this, the CJIS data and put it on, at the very least, its own VLAN. And somebody the other day came to me and said, well, we could put it on its own physical VLAN. And I agree, yes, we can put it on its own segment, right? That's really what a physical VLAN would be. That makes even more sense because that segment will be focused in and we can wrap the security around it that pertains to the CJIS piece. Now, some of those security capabilities we can use on the schools, the libraries, the other county networks or city networks, but we want to focus in on the CJIS part for this particular presentation. And when we're talking about connecting to external networks only through managed interfaces, right? And we'll talk about it in a minute, things like, oh, we're not going to multi-home, which just means there's not two cables coming into that computer, just the one. So the access can only be through the one physical thing. That's really important as we go through. And here they're also mentioning firewalls and other things. Just because we're connected to another CJIS entity doesn't mean we can't have a firewall in between, right? In case they have an issue, we're protected from it, and vice versa. The number of external networks connected to CGI must be related to the CGI data itself. So limiting how many, back to that segmentation, it ties into. Really important as we talk about that. And then putting firewalls in all cases where we're concerned. Or maybe just limiting the access, giving it its own pipe might be the correct response, especially when we talk about denial of service attacks. All right, boundary protection. Firewalls, these really are about denying by default, which is normal, right? We're supposed to do that anyway. Prevent split tunneling by making sure each device has one connection, right? So we're not allowing that to happen. Monitoring everything, and then making sure that network connections get terminated with the communication system after an hour of inactivity. So we don't make these tunnels and leave them open forever, especially when we're accessing CJIS. Has to be for the request, and as long as that continues to be more requests, okay. But if it's inactive for a while, shut it down so the bad guys can't listen in, right? That's really the goal here. And then develop controls so that we're aware when they could get in for that man in the middle attack or machine in the middle, right? MIM. Either way, we're seeing a lot more of these attacks in that specific nature. And so session hijacking, injecting false information, all of these would be terrible into our CJIS system and unfortunately have been part of the breaches of the past. So really identifying in those and really looking out for them.
So we've got another question, Sean.
Go ahead, please.
So Robert, we were on the DoS slide when Robert asked, what about cloud services?
Good question. So when we talk about denial of service, what we're talking about is them attacking the access point itself. They could hit the cloud service, right? It is a server somewhere else. The advantage of cloud services is oftentimes they can move the access point around much more quickly than we can because it's part of a larger organization like AWS or Azure or something else. The point is they can build in more protections to deal with that, but you got to ask. You've got to make sure they have those protections built in, especially if it pertains to your CJIS access. So great question. I hope that was enough of an answer. But it's not an easy solution, but it's one you have to actually look to that cloud provider and ask them, right? Make sure they have it. And if they don't, maybe look at another cloud provider or build it into the RFP that is one of your requirements, and they'll come up with the best answer because they want to win the RFP, and hopefully that's exactly the way they're going to help us, right? Good question, by the way.